my next trick, I'm going to pull a rabbit out of a hat. No, I'm just playing games with you. Why do I have a picture of a magician up though? Well, it's because people ask for things like a readmission dashboard, and in their head it's pretty simple. I want to see the number of readmits. I want to see specific diagnosis readmits like COPD or sepsis or AMI or heart failure. They just want to see it's simple to them, right? What's the big deal? It's not very complicated as a dashboard. And that's all true except for one simple thing. None of this data exists. There's no such thing as readmission data. There's admission data for sure. Every EHR has that. So we can look, and each system has MRNs, it has encounter IDs, it has admission dates, times. I want to use a bookmark, and I want to choose a specific patient who has visited multiple times. So they look at this data and they say, Dalton, it's not that hard. Look, this admission date is after this discharge. That's a readmission because it's the same patient. And I say, show me the flag on that record. Each record is an individual unique record. This record has nothing that tells me it's for a readmit of this previous discharge. And so it goes. And they look at that and they say, well, just do it. Just do the same thing. And you say, well, that's fantastic, but how do I even know this was an outpatient visit or not? And we could see the patient types, right? And maybe this is an inpatient visit and this is an inpatient visit, but this is really an outpatient visit. Well, now what do we do? Well, just skip that one. Oh, so I need to take rows that are unique in and of themselves. There's nothing that tells me it's a readmit. And now you want me to skip rows too. Do I skip one row or do I have to skip as many rows as is needed? And of course, in their heads, you need to skip as many rows as are needed to find the previous inpatient visit. But it gets more complicated than that. Maybe this visit was an inpatient visit for a broken hand that they had to have some surgery on, and this is for a heart failure, and this is for a nosebleed, and this is for sepsis, and this is for heart failure. Now, how do you join these? Each encounter has a set of diagnosis codes for that visit. So if I were to focus just on this one encounter where they came in on the 2nd and they were discharged on the 5th, I have a unique set of diagnosis codes. I've got, it could be 10, it could be 15, as in the case with my sample data, it might be 25 in your system. I've seen some systems that actually keep 50. And those diagnosis codes just go across. And if somebody looks at you and says, hey, I need to know if it was a COPD visit. Well, great. What diagnosis code is it? What should the primary diagnosis code be? Oh, well, if it was COPD, it could be any number of 10 different diagnosis codes for the primary. And you say, oh, that'd be easy. I can just create a map that says, hey, if it was this code, it's got to be COPD. And they're, well, it's not quite that easy. You see, it has to be something as a primary, and it also can't have certain values in any of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 15th, 50th diagnosis code. And now you're starting to understand why I had a picture of a magician up. They want you to pull data out of a hat, basically. Fortunately, you're not dealing with some 6-foot blonde assistant. You've got Qlik on your side, and specifically our ability to do ETL. So one of the things that we need to do first, our first step is going to be, let's just concatenate all of the diagnosis codes together. I want one big string that has all 15, all 25, all 50 diagnosis codes together. And so as I read them in, I'm simply going to concatenate them just using the Qlik concatenate. So then I would have for each encounter, I would have a field that has all of those values. Now let's take a look at how we would figure out COPD or sepsis. One of the neat things, and this is going to look strange to you, is our ability to do a preceding load. So typically if I were loading discharges, you'd see something like this where I begin loading the fields from some table, from a database, from some Excel file, from some CSV, from a QVD, wherever you get them. This syntax is a preceding load. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to need to do something with this all diagnosis field that doesn't really exist yet. So I precede the load of it with some code that actually can and then end up getting invoked, and I can refer to fields that really don't exist. The reason I do that, clearly I'm going to do a match here. I don't want to have to do all that concatenating over and over and over. In my case, I've got COPD and sepsis. In yours, you're really going to have to handle AMI and heart failure and a whole slew of other cores. Okay. What I simply do here is I say if, and I'm going to do a match, if my primary diagnosis code happens to be any of these, and I can't find any of these in my all diagnosis, then I know I've got sepsis. And so if I scroll way over here, you'll see how many I checked. If it equals 0, meaning that position wasn't found at all in my all diagnosis, I know I'm dealing with COPD. Else I'm going to do the same thing, and I can do it continually then for sepsis, and I would just continue to nest these if statements. That's just plain logic. Now you would have encounter records that have all their diagnosis in one string, and there's going to be a field that says this was a visit for COPD, this was a visit for sepsis, this was a visit for heart failure. Now we're going to look at our other magic, because what we need to do is basically compare those rows. SQL doesn't like to compare rows. That's not something that would be there. So many of our competitors would tell you, oh, just go ahead and build a data warehouse where you've done that magic logic of comparing rows together at the same time you filled these things out. With Qlik, I've got this beautiful ETL that says, let's do a previous. I want to compare, is the MRN record that I'm on now, is it the same as the previous MRN? Because if it is, I know I've got a readmission here at this point. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm doing basically a self join to that discharges table, and I'm only looking for inpatients. So here's how I skip the outpatients. I'm only going to be comparing inpatients to inpatient visits. And so I know if I've got the same MRN, I'm dealing with a readmission, and so I set an inpatient readmission flag. Now you're going to say this syntax seems kind of silly. Well, the reason I'm using dual is because I want to be able to do two things. I want the user to see yes or no, this was a readmit, so that they could use that as a flag. But I also need a count, and I'm going to show you why I'm going to be able to do some math now on this same field. I don't have to create two fields. I'm using our dual syntax that lets you have a text and a number for the same field value. I do the same thing, just comparing, and I say, hey, let me go get the date of that previous record. So if I were showing people, hey, I want to see the readmissions for COPD, I would be able to show you when they were previously discharged. I can take this, I can also go get that previous encounter. You'll see I can also do some more involved math. I can do an interval and find out the time between my new patient admission and my previous discharge. And that's how I know it's 6 days, 25 days, 183 days. I can do things here. Now I can calculate that as my difference, but I can also calculate and say, hey, that happened within a week. Hey, that happened within 30 days. And so I'm setting a whole slew of flags here that are just quick flags. I want to look at inpatient readmissions within 30 days. I want to look at inpatient readmissions within 120 days. And you can count those things, right? Now, that's for inpatients. So that's one way that I might want to look. Just show me all inpatient readmissions. Now, I also have a need for ED. I want to track frequent flyers to the ED, right? Well, how would I count those? If the patient type was ED here, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm only going to look for these, and you'll see that all I'm doing as I do this left join is I'm going to add a field for this flag, right? I'm going to say, hey, this was an ED readmission. This was the previous date of that ED visit. So if you did want to track frequent flyers and count ED readmissions, you can do that just as easily. How about those COPDs and those sepsis? Well, I can say where my patient type is inpatient. Oh yeah, where my core diagnosis is COPD. So my first step is to allow Qlik ETL to build a flag that says it's COPD. And now all I'm doing is I'm going to put a flag on that record. This was a COPD readmission. Here was my COPD previous date. Is this what's my readmission difference? Is this a COPD readmit within 7 days? And so it goes. That's really not that hard. The key is that keyword previous. What we can do with our ETL script allows you to basically make data on the fly. You're really truly pulling a rabbit out of a hat here in order to do this because the EHR system doesn't have any of that data. If I were to clear these flags and go back to that dashboard now, you'll see what I can do. I've got a count. I'm going to show you how I actually do that. And that's simply admission. If I look at the number of inpatient readmissions, you'll see I'm simply doing a sum. There's no if statement here. I'm not saying if the flag equals yes, go do this. And that's the beauty of dual. And yet at the same time, I give the end user the quick ability to say, yes, I want to see just inpatient readmissions within 30 days. So you can use that as a flag so that they can select from it, but you can also just count those values up and you don't have to train your users, oh, if the value's 1, then that's what that means. This is human readable. That's going to be really quick counts. None of these things are using if statements. They're just sums, which are super fast and Qlik. For my next trick, I'm going to make a 747 disappear. That's going to take me a little while. I'll be working on that though.